Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 10 episodes of The X-Files. In preparation and celebration of The X-Files' return to television this January, I thought I'd do a video where I count down my top 10 favorite episodes as well as my 5 least favorite episodes of The X-Files. So I have to give a spoiler warning for the entire series run of The X-Files. So, I'll start this video off with my bottom 5 least favorite episodes of The X-Files. So, as you may or may not be aware, before doing this top 10 episode videos, I watch every episode of the series in question and give each episode a rating from 1 to 10, so I know the highest rated episodes are the best and the lowest rated episodes are the worst. Typically, when I do this for most shows, there's only 1 or 2 episodes rated at 1, which is my lowest rating. And most episodes in the bottom 5 are rated as like 2 or 3. And when I did a video for House MD, only 1 episode rated at 2, the rest were 4 or above. And when I did one for Game of Thrones, the lowest rated episode was a 5. However, with the X-Files, there were a lot of 1s. I mean, a lot. In fact, I'd say if I gathered up all the episodes rated lower than a 5, it would take up more than half of the series. However, on the flip side, for my top 10 favorite episodes, there were more than 10 episodes rated at a 10, so there were a lot of great episodes as well. So it's not like I hate The X-Files, it's just this is a bit more polarizing show than I've ever reviewed before, with a lot of episodes all over the spectrum. And I'll get more into this when I do my full-length review of The X-Files. So let's kick off my bottom 5 least favorite. As I mentioned, each of these episodes got a rating of a 1, the worst, and I consider them the worst of the worst. So we're starting with my number 5, Improbable. Improbable is the 9th season episode that guest starred Burt Reynolds, and it was a failed attempt at doing an X-Files comedy. And as you're about to find out, I'm not a huge fan of X-Files comedies in general. However, this one just missed the mark entirely, and it wasn't the least bit funny, nor was the story any interesting. In fact, I'd say this episode was pretty painful to watch. As you could tell, they were trying really hard and failing at every turn. Burt Reynolds' character was meant to come off as suave and cool, but he just came off as ridiculous and annoying. Number 4 is Post-Modern Prometheus, which I know I'll get a lot of flack for because this is a fan favorite I've seen on many top 10 lists, and I gotta say it infuriates me every time I see it because I felt this episode was as awful can be. It was obvious they were trying to parody schlock horror from the 40s and 50s, but it was just too much. It was way too over the top. It was completely out of place in the show of The X-Files, as characters behaved in ways they shouldn't, and it was just ridiculous. Again, I didn't find it the least bit funny. It was just awful. And when it ended with Mulder and Scully taking the monster to a Cher concert, I literally wanted to shoot myself. That was one of the most awful pieces of crap I've ever had to endure. Number 3 is Never Again. So my top 3, I'm getting into the episodes where they actually tried to come off as serious, and it was even more ridiculous and comical. This 4th season episode was about a guy whose tattoo of a woman was talking to him and telling him to kill people. Yeah, just give you a few moments to let that sink in. It was as dumb as it sounds and more. And then Scully had an affair with him and the tattoo was telling him to kill her, so he ended up burning it off. It was one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. This episode had no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Number 2 is 3. So this is the episode that takes place where Scully is away because she's been abducted by aliens / Gillian Anderson was pregnant. So Mulder goes off on an adventure by himself and falls in love with a vampire who's in a trio of vampires. This episode was just so cheesy. It had every ridiculous vampire cliche and treated it as if it were serious and had too many twists. The romance with Mulder was really superficial and cheesy. I didn't buy it for a second, and it was about vampires. Yeah, this episode sucked. And my number 1 least favorite episode of The X-Files is The Jersey Devil. To be fair to this episode, it was the 5th episode ever of the X-Files, so they were still trying to find their footing, and the first season was the most sort of on the nose with the paranormal phenomenon, but this episode takes the cake when it comes to ridiculousness when they're trying to be serious. It's about a Bigfoot type creature living in the forest of New Jersey close to Atlantic City, and yes, it's as ridiculous as it sounds, but wait, it gets better. The episode ends with a sequence of Mulder, Scully, a park ranger, and an anthropologist having a Benny Hill style chase scene with the Jersey Devil. It was one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. Honestly, I think this would be great Mystery Science Theater 3000 fodder, as I could just imagine the two robots tearing this one apart. It's really that bad, making it my number one least favorite episode of the X-Files. Now, before I get to my top 10 favorite episodes of the X-Files, I just want to give a mention to what I think is the most overrated episode of the X-Files. If I'm being honest, this episode wasn't as bad as the episodes I just mentioned, so it wasn't bad enough to make my bottom 10, let alone my bottom 5, but it was still bad. After I watched it, my first reaction was to go, oh my god, that was so stupid. And then later I looked up on IMDb to find out what was the highest rated episode of the X-Files, and it was this one, and my mind was blown. So my pick for most overrated episode of the X-Files is Bad Blood. This is the 5th season episode that guest starred Luke Wilson, and again, it's about vampires. This episode reminded me a lot of the Breaking Bad episode The Fly, which a lot of people also loved, and by the way, both episodes were written by Vince Gilligan, and I personally feel is easily the worst episode of that series. It's similar in the way that all established character traits are completely thrown out the window just for the sake of comedy, and it does not at all jive with the lore of the rest of the show, and I'm sorry, but that's not okay. Mulder and Scully were given fake, exaggerated character traits that they never exhibited before, as the story was told through flashbacks, first from Scully, then from Mulder, and Scully's version had Mulder acting like an insane wacko, and Mulder's version had Scully acting like a stuck-up stick in the mud. Ha ha, except for the fact that these characters act nothing like this, and it's clearly been established this isn't the relationship that they have. And plus, on top of that, this episode really isn't that funny, and the big reveal at the end that the entire town were all vampires was just beyond ridiculous, so my mind is completely blown how this clearly subpar episode is the highest rated one on IMDb. So now, let me get to my top 10 favorite episodes of The X-Files, starting with my number 10, Colony. The second season episode, which is the first part of a two-parter that explores Mulder and Scully investigating what turns out to be a group of clones that eventually leads Mulder to discovering his sister as an adult who is being hunted by a shape-shifting alien bounty hunter. This is an insanely intense episode, and also really heartfelt as we see the possibility of what it would be like for Mulder to finally find his sister, even though this is a little bit undercut by the reveal that she's just a clone. It's still an intense thrill ride with the cliffhanger ending that had me on the edge of my seat. Number 9 is Paper Clips, the third season episode, part 3 of a three-parter that began with the second season finale. This is one of the most X-File type episodes, and one in which they pulled off the best as they turn up the intensity to full blast as the cigarette smoking man actually tried to kill Mulder, and he manages to come back from the dead to uncover a sinister government conspiracy revolving around a program called Paper Clips and discover clues of why Scully was abducted, and they start to put all the pieces together, and it ends with a fascinating gambit where Mulder and Scully use a Navajo code breaker to force the cigarette smoking man into a stalemate where he has to let Mulder live. It was truly an intense and satisfying episode. Number 8 is Talitha Cumi, the third season finale where the life of Mulder's mother hangs in the balance, where they investigate a man capable of instantly healing the sick and preventing death. This man, Jeremiah Smith, who is an alien that no longer wishes to cooperate with this conspiracy and wants to help humanity. Mulder and Scully strive to track him down while a shape-shifting alien bounty hunter hunts after him, and then Mulder must choose between uncovering the conspiracy or saving his mother's life, a truly intense and high-stakes episode. Number 7 is Existence, the 8th season finale, where Mulder teams up with Agent Doggett to uncover the super soldier conspiracy, while Scully is set to give birth to a baby the alien conspiracy are very interested in. Ultimately, a high-stakes episode that I think represents the best of what the X-Files has to offer. I know many people weren't that happy with the super soldier storyline, but honestly, when it was done right, I preferred it to the Black Oil storyline, and this episode is certainly an example of when it was done right, as we got to see Mulder at his best, on the top of his game, hunting down a conspiracy, and we also got to appreciate Robert Patrick's Agent Doggett a lot more in this episode. Plus, we finally got the long-awaited death of Alex Krycek. Definitely a top-notch episode. Number 6 is Anasazi, which is probably, I probably pronounced that one wrong. However, it's the second season finale in which Mulder received a disc with an encrypted, top-secret government files from a hacker who shortly after turns up dead. It seems this information is so sensitive the government conspiracy is killing anyone who gets their hands on it. So when Mulder gets it and threatens to go public, they turn up the heat on him like never before. This is one of the most intense episodes of the X-Files, and the time in the series where things really came to a head, and had one of the best, most suspenseful cliffhangers ever seen on television. To me, this episode was where the X-Files really established itself as something special. Number 5 is Synchrony, a highly unexpected and, in my opinion, underrated episode of The X-Files that popped up in its 4th season. To me, this episode broke the mold of stereotypical horror monster of the week episode to give a dark and thrilling story of time travel that I felt really worked. As an old man warns a younger man his friend is about to get hit by a bus, when this incident isn't averted, the younger man is arrested and charged with murder, while the older man goes around killing people in strange ways. Mulder soon uncovers that the old man and the young man are the same person, the older man being a time traveler from the future on a mission to prevent the invention of time travel. It's a truly intriguing science fiction adventure that frankly I wish the X-Files did more of, as they managed to pull it off in a typical dark and spooky style that only the X-Files can do. Number 4 is Monday, the 6th season episode, which is another example of the X-Files taking a more science fiction slant as it explores the possibility of a time loop. Now, a personal pet peeve of mine is whenever there's a story about a time loop, people immediately compare it to Groundhog's Day or say it's a ripoff of that movie. I'm sorry, but Groundhog's Day isn't the only time loop story in existence, nor does it have a monopoly on the genre, so don't even bring that up. Anyway, in this episode, a man goes to rob a bank who Mulder and Scully catch only to find that he's wired with explosives, and then he subsequently blows himself up and everyone else with him. His girlfriend is forced to relive that day over and over and over again, often tries to warn Mulder and Scully of their impending doom, but to no avail. However, eventually Mulder reasons it out for himself and manages to break the loop. This was a great episode. This was really well pulled off. It had some dark humor in it as well. I could feel the quality of writing, acting, cinematography. Everything just came together wonderfully to tell an amazing story. Number 3 is Clyde Buckman's final Repose. For those of you that thought I was biased against all X-Files comedy episodes, think again. I like the comedy episodes just fine when they're done right, that is, and are consistent with the characters and lore established in the show. I also really like the comedy episode Jose Chung's From Outer Space, but not quite enough to make my top 10 list. However, Clyde Buckman was a great episode with the right mix of dark humor and intriguing X-Files sci-fi. In this 3rd season episode, Mulder and Scully work with the reluctant psychic played by Peter Boyle, who is able to predict when someone is going to die, who has such a funny and morbid way of looking at things. He was a great character to have around, and it only enhanced the quality of the show, and the story they crafted around him while being a tad silly really worked and fit in the X-Files universe, definitely making this a high quality episode. Number 2 is Fight the Future. Yes, I know I'm on shaky ground here, as Fight the Future technically isn't an episode, it's a feature film. However, it's set in the same time frame as and lore as the TV series. I made a decision to include it in my countdown, and it is, after all, my countdown, so I'll do as I like. Fight the Future, in my opinion, is a highly underrated movie. Those who have watched my top 50 movie series will note this was mentioned. It has one of my top 50 favorite movies of all time. The beginning of this film alone was absolutely amazing, as it began with one of the creepiest horror scenes with the cavemen being attacked by the aliens, and then flash forward to the present times where a young kid in Texas is taken over by the same alien creature, and then it had this amazing sequence, which in my opinion is one of the best action sequences in any film, where Mulder is trapped in a room with a bomb that eventually blows up because the FBI agent in charge simply let it go off. This was the X-Files at its absolute best, throwing everything in the kitchen sink at this film. The only reason this didn't quite make my number one is because it does kind of slow down in the middle there, but the conspiracy and shadow play is exactly what I want from the X-Files. And my number one favorite episode of the X-Files is Tempus Fugit and Max. This fourth season two-parter to me exemplifies everything the X-Files can do best. A mystery that was more or less wrapped up within these two parts. That begins with the mysterious plane crash, involving a UFO survivor that Mulder and Scully had met before. It's absolutely fascinating to watch Mulder and Scully work to unravel the mystery of what happened on this flight, and to see them slowly put the pieces together. It involved a government conspiracy and aliens. Most X-Files two-part mysteries I personally find too vague and without any real resolution, where this episode ended with, kind of open-ended resolution, but pretty much it was all wrapped up, a lot more than most X-Files episodes are. Seeing Mulder finally piece together what happened on the original flight was really fascinating, and on top of that, seeing his big confrontation with the government assassin on the plane that was subsequently interrupted by aliens hijacking the plane was absolutely amazing, and everything I wanted out of an X-Files episode, making this my number one favorite episode of the X-Files. So that's it for my top 10 episodes of the X-Files. You can check out my channel for many other top 10 episode videos. I did one for Battlestar Galactica, Dexter, Lost, House MD, Breaking Bad, and each of the 5 Star Trek series. I also do regular videos on Game of Thrones and Star Trek, and I will be covering weekly episode reviews of the X-Files when it starts in January, as well as an overall X-Files review, which will come out in a couple of days. So make sure you subscribe so you can keep up with all that. Thanks a lot for watching.